Hello. Hey, this is a test. Is it working?
Anyone on?
Hmm?
Anyone on?
Not yet, but
I'll come say hi.
I need to find.
You know what? Now how it's time to change the grass. Just check.
Okay. Sandy, are you able to hear us? It says Sandy's iPad, but I don't know if she's able to hear us. All right.
Oh, it's recording?
I don't know. Are you recording also, Rabbi?
Yeah, I'm going to record the class. Is that okay?
I see it up top. Sure.
All right. Okay. So this way, whatever you say can and will be used in the court against you. All
Oops.
right.
Oh, we're
Hannah?
comfortable.
Okay, good. All right. So my real agenda for this class is not to have an agenda other than to hear whatever it is, whatever kind of questions that you might have about Pesach, because as I wrote in my email, this year Pesach is going to be different from all other Pesachs.
That was my first question.
That was your first question. Actually, the first question I got was how I got my name, Pesach, and my answer is that I didn't choose it. I couldn't come up with it by myself. They didn't ask me. But before we do some things about Pesach, I just wanted to share with you a story that I heard from my dad, and I probably shared it with you guys before, but I think in this context it speaks volumes about what's going on, and I think it's been passed around as well, but I wanted to share this story with you. There were two brothers who were great Hasidic masters. One was Reb Zusha of Annapolis, and his brother was Reb Elimelech of Lezensk. And there's a lot of stories of them. They would go together to inspire communities. This is back in Russia, several hundred years ago, and they would go to town to try to inspire different communities that didn't have full-time rabbis, or they didn't have full-time infrastructure, or whatever it may be. So these two brothers are traveling once to a particular community, and as it always is, they get reported to the authorities. Somebody didn't like it, whether it was anti-Semitism or something else. They ended up in prison. They ended up in this like Russian dungeon.
Right.
And in this dungeon, they are there with a bunch of other inmates. It's a terrible room, and the room is, filled with all these criminals. Comes the morning, they wake up, and Reb Zusha finds that his brother, Rabbi Elimelech, who, by the way, I happen to be a descendant, direct descendant of Rabbi Elimelech, he's
cool.
crying. He's crying.
Right.
And his brother, Reb Zusha, turns to him. He says, "What are you crying about?" He says, "I'm crying because today I'm going to have a hard time davening. I'm not going to be able to daven today." He says, why can't you daven? Why can't you pray today? So he pointed to the corner of the room. There was a bucket that the inmates used as a bathroom. And because it was a big room, the halacha is that you cannot pray, you cannot daven in a bathroom. You can't make a bracha, you can't put on talis, you can't put on tefillin, you can't daven in a bathroom. So he was so upset about being robbed of the opportunity to be able to daven. And therefore he was crying. So Rabbi Elimelech, Rabbi Zusha told him, he says, "I don't understand why you're crying. Why is this making you cry?" And he said to him like this. He says, "Who said that you cannot daven, you cannot pray in a bathroom? The Torah says, it's law, it's Jewish law, that it's prohibited to say Hashem's name or to put on tefillin, to put on a sacred, do something sacred in a bathroom. So by not praying today, you are following Hashem's command. So yesterday, you connected to Hashem by davening. Today, you connect to Hashem by not davening. Because the same God that you wanted to pray to is the same God that says that you shouldn't pray, you shouldn't daven when it's a bathroom." And he realized that there's such brilliance to this advice. He's saying, the circumstances always change. It's a matter of how can we find the particular way that we can serve Hashem through that particular incident or that particular challenge. So that thought brought him such joy, such simcha, that he stood up and he started dancing with his brother. And that joy was so infectious that all the other inmates are now dancing together with them. And now the guards come here and they come see that these Jews are dancing and they're infecting everybody else with this joy. And they ask one of the inmates, "What's going on? Why is the dancing?" And of course, they pointed to the Jews. If the Jews are all the problem. And then they asked them, "What's the problem?" And they pointed to the pail. They said, "If the pail in the corner of the room is a cause for joy, we're going to get rid of that pail." And they took it out of the room. They took it out of the room. And then after that, it was taken out. So Rabbi Zusha turns to Elimelech and he says, "Now you want to daven also? You can do that as well."
I love it. I love it.
So I think that this story, I think, speaks volumes about what we're experiencing now. It's so unprecedented that the shuls around the country, even around the world, have been closed. And we have not been able to get together as a community, at least physically. And, it would seem counterintuitive that it's, what do we do about reading the Torah? What do we do about saying Kaddish? What do we do about davening with a minyan and all these different things that we do, in a congregational setting? It would seem to think that, we're being robbed from an opportunity. But this story teaches us that, on the contrary, we don't run the world, Hashem does. And in every opportunity, we have a way to celebrate the relationship with Hashem. It might not be the relationship that we expected. It might not be the method and the tool of which we were planning, but we can find a relationship nonetheless through the circumstances. So today we are celebrating our connection to Hashem by observing another mitzvah of saving lives, of pikuach nefesh. If we're allowed to leave shul or break Shabbos or break Yom Kippur or eat on Yom Kippur or do anything to break a law to save a life, we're allowed to do that. So by sitting on our couches, if we're able to save a life and not go to shul, that is the call of the hour. And that is the way that we are serving Hashem during this challenging and crazy time. But hopefully they'll take the pail out of this world. They'll take that filthy virus out, and we'll be able to daven, pray, and sing, and all the other things that we do together in person. But in the meantime, thank God for technology, man. I mean, Siggy, you got us rolling on this to do something on the computer. So being able to, get together, at least in this way, is definitely very, very special.
Oh, this is great. Sure.
Awesome. All right, so let me answer any questions that you have about Pesach. And I understand that the idea that our plans might be upended and we're going to end up having to do our own Seders could be overwhelming. But I assure you that it's not as bad as we think, and there's actually ways that we can do it very, very easily. And, the thought, Pesach has always been associated with an overwhelming sense of urgency or overwhelmingness. We kind of feel like we're going back to slavery in Egypt with all the things that we are, we have to do. But if we break it down, it's doable. It's doable, and we're here to help you make that happen. If by miracle we can do something together, that's great. But right now we have to plan for what's in front of us, and most likely we're not going to have that opportunity. So doing that, in order to be able to understand what's easier to do, what's not easier to do, it's also important to understand the basics of what the Torah actually requires, for Passover. So I'm going to go over a basic overview of the basics of Pesach and what the mitzvahs of Pesach are, and kind of put into framework of which things are required by halacha or a biblical mitzvah versus customs. Now, I'm not going to say that customs are not important, but customs come second place to an actual mitzvah that's in the Torah. All right. So, do you want me to do the basics first and then the questions, or do you want to let me know what your questions are so I can make sure I can include them? Your call. Oh, hi, Bridget.
Bridget.
Hi, Rabbi. I'm
How are
late
you?
even by video. I fell asleep.
Hello, Bridget.
Hi, Bridget. How are you?
Hi, Bridget.
Hi. Sorry I'm late.
That's okay. You just got to the part where we're going to start covering questions about Pesach, how to observe, how to prepare for Pesach, and how to lead a Seder if you have to at home. Okay, so what's your preference? Questions first? And
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's all you, Rabbi.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes, sure.
Only because your site from my dad always falls on Pesach.
Yeah.
How does that go down other than, I guess, lighting a candle?
So you light a candle,
Right.
and you can say the memorial prayer, like the Yizkor memorial prayer. I'll be happy to send you the text.
Please.
So it won't be Kaddish itself, but rest assured that if you are unable to recite Kaddish, or to be able to have a minyan at that time, then you reciting it then without the minyan would be as if you did it with a minyan.
Okay.
All right.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that will definitely address that. All right, so let's go over some of the basics, and then I think a lot of the questions could spring from that, or also put them into perspective and into place as well. The biblical command of Pesach. Every holiday has its biblical commandments. And it's important to also differentiate which one are the customs and which ones are the commandments. For example, when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, if somebody says, oh, I had a wonderful Rosh Hashanah, I dipped apples in honey. It's a nice custom, but the mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah is not dipping apples in honey. It's blowing of the shofar. So when it comes to Pesach as well, on the one hand, this year, we might be home and have more time to prepare for Pesach. On the other hand, because we're home and we have other obligations that we're not used to, or we don't have the resources or the kids to help that we used to. So we might not be able to do it. So knowing what is the mitzvah and what is the custom is important. So let's go to the actual basis in the Torah. We all know the story of Pesach in the Torah, and as a result of those things, the Torah tells us how we're supposed to observe Pesach. First and foremost, the Torah tells us we should not have leavened bread for 7 days. That was then in Israel. It's 7 days. Outside of Israel, it's 8 days. So for the duration of Pesach, we should not own, nor should we eat chametz. Period. It's as simple and as straightforward as that. Not to own or not to have chametz. But what does that mean? It means not to have any bread that was that became leavened, and it also means not to own any chametz. So even if you're not eating it, you should not own it. So how do we address that? There's two things that we do. One is that we clean the house. So if there's any, you go to the kitchen, and typical places where you eat, or typical places in your home where you eat, whether it's the kitchen, your dining room, your bed, depends where you eat, right? If there's a place where it's typical for there to be breadcrumbs, we got to clean it out, because if we're going to be in our house over Pesach, we don't want to become, encounter the chametz that we stashed away, or crumbs that we had. So simply cleaning out our house, places that we need to get rid of chametz is where we're supposed to focus. Now, having said that, Pesach cleaning or getting rid of breadcrumbs is not the same as spring cleaning, okay? While it's really tempting to be able to get to the attic or get to the garage and start cleaning out every shelf and every cupboard and doing all the spring cleaning, dust is not chametz. You're allowed to have dust on Pesach. You can't eat it, but you're allowed to own it, all right? So if you really want to minimize the taxing aspect of cleaning or getting ready for Pesach, if it's overwhelming, it's important to make that distinction. So the cleaning for Pesach is really only necessary in places that chametz is common. So it could be your car, it could be common places that you have, and that's all you really need to focus on. That's step number one. Step number two is that even the chametz that we end up, even if we clean our house, spick and span, even if you went at a whole overwhelming 9 yards and you did spring cleaning, chances are you're still owning chametz. You're still owning leavened bread products in your house, and you might not even necessarily associate it as bread. Ira, can we see your bar? Do you have a stocked bar in your house?
No.
No bar?
Can't see my bar.
Okay, no, we can't see your bar. Okay, but most of those drinks are fermented grains, right?
Mhm.
So vodkas and schnapps, and I mean, not fruit-based ones, but a lot of these beer is made out of barley, right? So all of these things are fermented grains, so that would be considered, we can't own them on Pesach. And I'm not asking you to go drink up all those bottles before Pesach.
That's
And
why
you
you
don't-
can't see my bar. They're all gone.
and you don't want to, be asked to get rid of them just before Pesach, okay? But even if you don't have a bar in your house and you don't have alcoholic beverages, there's so many other things. Your typical dishes and equipment, even if it's clean from an FDA perspective, it could be very clean and spick and span, health-wise, it still absorbs chametz. It still absorbs your toaster, even if it's clean. It's a chametz sticker toaster. It's a bread toaster. So the custom of the sages is a very simple solution. Many of you are familiar with this, and that is simply called mechiras chametz, selling the chametz. And it's a complex halachic transaction. So I'm not suggesting that every person go to their non-Jewish neighbor and say, "Can I sell you my chametz?" it is intrinsic. It is a complicated halachic transaction, but rabbis take care of this on your behalf. So from a community perspective, it is as simple as going online on our website and filling out a simple form, giving me or the rabbi who does this in charge the power of authority to sell the chametz on your behalf. No money has to exchange hands. You don't have to give anybody the keys to your house. On the flip side, they don't pay the mortgage for you during Pesach either. Okay? But going on to the website and simply filling out the form is very, very simple, very effective. And by doing so, we simply avoid a biblical transgression of owning chametz. Okay, so you still want to do a basic cleaning, because even, technically you could say that when you sell the chametz, then whatever is in your cupboard is not yours, and that's technically true. But, so step number one is to do a basic cleaning of the areas that typically have crumbs. Step number two is to sell the chametz. And that gets back, and then it becomes back into your ownership right after Pesach without any transaction. So you really don't have to do it. But halachically, it's such an important element to do because it absolves you from that transgression. Okay, so that's point number one, not to own or to have any chametz on Pesach. The next is most of these are in Exodus, right, in the story of Pesach. The next one is that we should eat matzah. All right?
Hey.
We should eat matzah. And I always joke, and it's not a joke, it's true, is that you're allowed to eat bread on Pesach. You just cannot eat leavened bread, right?
Yes. How about
Yeah.
jelly?
Jelly? Hi, what'd you say?
You also have to remember a matzah at this time is perfect because it slips under the door and you don't have to come in contact with anybody.
Right.
Oh, that's such a scary thought.
Hi, can you hear it? Joanne, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, welcome.
Hi.
Welcome to our class.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
So we're in the middle of discussing the basics of Passover and some of the questions that we have as a result from them.
Rabbi, I have a question about the alcohol. If it's sealed in a bottle that was never opened, why get rid of it?
You don't have to get rid of it, but whether it's sealed or not, it doesn't make it you still own those alcoholic beverages, whether they are sealed or not sealed.
Oh, but I can have a can of corn or whatever in the house as long as I sell my chametz.
Yes, you can. I would simply, just logistically, it's best to take anything that you have in the house that's still chametz, but you're not going to be using it for Pesach, and simply store it away from use. So put it in a pantry that you're not going to use for Pesach. A lot of times people just take a cupboard and store all the things that they're not going to be using for Pesach on it, and you could put you can buy, the do not cross tape like you see at a crime scene.
Yeah.
You could put it across there. I simply print out stickers from Google or online. It says, not for use on Pesach, so you could even put a piece of tape or a Post-it note and says not for use on Passover. Yes, you do the notes. So we're trying to highlight things that you can do without going out of the house and having to buy unnecessary, things or making unnecessary trips. You don't have to use any pre-printed item. You could just simply designate it. But, simply selling the chametz by this, thing, you want to, through this process of doing it online, you don't own it, but you also want to be able to have it out of sight, out of sight, out of mind. You don't want to necessarily have, during your Pesach Seder, you're going to have a bottle of schnapps. And just because it's sold, all right. So when we say that the mitzvah of Pesach is to eat matzah, so that is the mitzvah that we just simply fulfill the obligation of Passover by eating matzah. And matzah is defined by wheat and flour that got together, but didn't have enough time to rise. So that usually takes 18 minutes. So matzah is made inside of 18 minutes. Anything else that's usually made with flour and water are usually fermenting or rising. So any bread is obviously puffed up. Yeast usually is just an agent to help it rise. But anything else like pasta, pretzels, crackers, all those things are all considered chametz. So we stay away from those, and we eat the matzah. All right. So number one was not to have or own leavened bread. Mitzvah number two was to eat matzah. There's additional matzah, the mitzvah to eat the bitter herbs. Back in the times of the temple, the mitzvah was to eat the bitter herbs and the matzah, as well as a piece of the Passover offering, the lamb. But today we don't have the Passover lamb, so we observe Pesach only by eating the matzah and by eating the bitter herbs. And then there's one more mitzvah, which is not necessarily associated with Pesach exclusively, but it's attached to all holidays, which is to be happy.
Yay.
Yes, the mitzvah of Pesach, of the three pilgrim holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot alike, it says in the Torah, "V'samachta b'chagecha," we should be happy. And the reason why I think this is so important is because,
And party, mega, right?
well, you be festive, you do it with joy, you do it with happiness. So the reason why I think this is important is that when we just highlighted what the biblical commandments are in regards to Pesach, which means that the most important way of observing Pesach is by not having or owning chametz, eating matzah throughout Pesach and having some bitter herbs. That means technically, if that's all you did, you fulfilled the mitzvah of Pesach. So instead of working on how many pounds of brisket we were able to get or not get, or I couldn't get, even if we, God forbid, didn't be able to get the recipe that we wanted from a neighbor who couldn't find it, and the brisket failed, we still fulfilled the mitzvah of Pesach. And even the mitzvah of being happy is important, and that's so important because sometimes, and I've seen this in my own family or other, people sometimes get so carried away with, certain tradition. There's so many customs out there. There are many, many customs out there, and I'm not going to knock any of them. I think a lot of them are great, and I'll be happy to address a lot of the reasons behind them and why they might be important, to some of them are not important. But the main point is that a custom should never come at the expense of a mitzvah. A custom, the definition of a custom is that it's meant to enhance a mitzvah. It's meant to make your Passover more special, more unique, more friendly, more unique to your family. And keeping those traditions are beautiful. But if they are beautiful, that's when they're supposed to be observed. If they are going to come at the expense of making everybody crazy, then we have to second guess the purpose of what those customs are. And it would be then a contradiction in priorities halachic wise, because a custom should never come at the expense of the biblical commandment. So just like apples and honey on Rosh Hashanah doesn't come to replace shofar. Shofar is the way to biblically observe Rosh Hashanah, not apples and honey. So doing something on Passover, just because you made your grandmother's brisket or whatever it might be, but didn't have matzah, or you were miserable on Pesach because you had to clean more than was necessary, then it's a contradiction to what it's about. So I think that's why I wanted to start with that, by knowing what the basics are, and knowing that by fulfilling those commandments, we do the main part of Passover, then we've done, 90% of the work. And if you note, in all those verses that I just quoted, it doesn't say the word Seder. It doesn't even say the word Afikoman, right? I mean, these things are beautiful, and we're going to talk about doing the Seder and how important it is to do that order. Oh, and by the way, there's one more mitzvah as well. I did skip that, which is to tell the story of Passover. Yeah. And, to remember the Exodus, okay? But doing that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily do the entire Haggadah from A to Z if it's going to, if you have kids, if kids are in the house, or if it's going to be too troublesome, or you feel like it's going to be too tiring, you could also do them in your own words. You can take a summary. I'm not saying you shouldn't do the Haggadah. I'm not advocating that. I'm saying that, the mitzvah of telling the story, remembering the Exodus, that is the mitzvah. How much of the text that you say is really up to, how much gedult or how much you could handle. But you shouldn't get stressed out if you can't necessarily cover, from cover to cover of the Haggadah. All right, any questions on any of those things so far? About the selling of the chametz, about matzah, or about the types of matzah? Any questions that you want me to address?
I know that there's shmura matzah, and there's the matzah that we buy in the stores. Is there another matzah other than those?
That's basically the two types that there are, shmura matzah and non-shmura matzah. There are other options which would be known as rich matzah. Rich matzah is matzah that has ingredients added in addition to flour and water. So let's say an egg matzah is considered rich matzah. Flour and water which is the basis of matzah, is called the bread of the poor. It was like, the poor slaves, that's what they would eat. They didn't have enough time to let it rise, whether because they didn't have time or because they were leaving Egypt. So the way the Haggadah phrases Passover matzah is that it was bread of the poor and was very basic. So that's what we use to fulfill the mitzvah. But if there is matzah that was made with other ingredients, like eggs or other spices, for example, it's considered kosher for Passover as long as it was made inside of 18 minutes. But most people do not use it, especially during the Seder. But I do want to take a minute and discuss the difference. Oh, sure. I do want to take a minute to discuss the difference between shmura matzah and non-shmura matzah. And shmura matzah literally means guarded matzah, that the process was guarded from beginning to end. So machine matzah is totally kosher for Passover. It's flour, it's water, it's mixed together in a machine, all baked before 18 minutes, and it's totally kosher for Passover, no question. But there are people who want to go be more stringent, if you will, or they want to take up an additional custom. And the custom for shmura matzah is to make sure that every process is guarded along the way. So instead of relying on machines, everything is done by hand. So that's why the round matzah, that's why shmura matzah is round, because it's made by hand. Try making a square matzah by hand. It's not so easy. It really isn't easy. And it doesn't come out as flat as it does in the boxes. So there are lots of people who go the extra mile to have shmura matzah because not only is it man-made or handmade instead of machine-made, it's guarded from the very beginning of the process of when it's made. So on the field, it starts, to make sure that the wheat is not excessively wet, and that when it's harvested and it's brought into the mill, it's covered from becoming wet. Because the moment that moisture comes in contact with the flour, that's when the process can theoretically begin to rise. Chabad has been a big advocate of promoting shmura matzah, at least for the Seder, because the first night is the most important, in terms of eating the matzah. So I recommend that if you're able to get your hands on shmura matzah, It's ideal to be able to have it for at least the first night for the Seder. And that's one of the things that we are here to help you with. Bless you. That's one of the things that we're here to help you with, and we're happy to provide shmura matzah to you guys for the first night of the Seder. Any other questions about matzah? No? All right, let's talk about some of the different customs that are out there. Just like shmura matzah is a custom, right? It's just going the extra mile of stringency. There are some people who say, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds crazy. It sounds over the top. And sometimes they're right. Some of them come from, they call bubba-mises. They don't have a lot of rationale behind them. But some of them do have a lot of rationale behind them. I think that the best perspective that I can use, at least today, in just giving an insight as to where and why they're effective is coronavirus. And I'll tell you what I mean. Let's say there is the CDC, and they give you specific guidelines of what you should and what you shouldn't do in regards to coronavirus, okay? So let's say, for example, right now, they tell you social distancing and, washing your hands properly for, 20 seconds. And okay, let's say those are the basics, right? But they don't require you to wear a mask. It's not required, at least right now, by the CDC to wear a mask, okay? So why are there people, and I'm not talking about Bridget, somebody who's actually a nurse who's working and has to wear a mask, right? Like in your work, you should have to wear a mask. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying if you're a regular, citizen going out, to do some of your basic shopping, and so you're shopping and you want to, you're going to the supermarket, you're keeping away from other people, you're wearing gloves or whatever. If the CDC is not requiring you to wear a mask, why are people wearing masks? What do you think the reason is?
Extra protection.
Extra protection, exactly that. It's a stringency. They're trying to be extra cautious, right? And nobody says they're off the wall. I understand the benefits of wearing a mask. I've also heard the rationale of not wearing a mask because you end up touching your face more because you're trying to fix it, you're trying to adjust it, and you end up, touching your face more than you would necessarily. But that's up to an individual's discretion to decide whether or not they want to have a mask, right? It might become the norm that later on or at some point we would have to. Right now, it's not. So my point is that Passover Chametz is the same as coronavirus in terms of how we treat the pitfalls or the stringency of how distant we want to be from it. For flour and water to come into contact with each other is a real, that is the real issue on Passover, what causes chametz, what causes something to be leavened. So how far one goes to distance themselves from the opportunity or the possibility from that happening, you have the basis. So let's use the CDC, their guidelines as the equation, to equate it with the Torah, the biblical command. Okay, these are what you have to do. And then there are people who go the extra mile. All right. So coronavirus is really just an analogy of how people might be extra stringent, but it's not the letter of the law. And when it comes to Pesach, there are a lot of people who have a lot of different customs that go beyond the letter of the law. So are there any ones that stick out in your mind that you have questions about? Like you've seen, maybe your parents do it, or maybe friends do it, or maybe you heard of that you want to have addressed?
The 4 cups.
Okay, great. The 4 cups is actually a tradition that is not a commandment in the Torah, but it's connected to the, in the story of the Exodus, when the Torah describes the Exodus of the Jewish people, it uses 4 expressions of redemption, 4 Hebrew expressions. One is Vehitzesi, which means Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt. The other one is Vehitzalti, I saved them.
All right.
Alti, I redeemed them. Velakachti, I took them out. So the sages have correlated a glass of wine or a cup of wine for each of those expressions of redemption. Now, on a typical meal, by the way, in Jewish law, we end up having 2 cups of wine. Right? We always make Kiddush, right? We always begin Shabbos and holidays by making a blessing over a cup of wine. That's Kiddush. Okay? Then in most cases, although we don't always do this because it's not mandatory, but when you do grace for grace after meals, after a meal, and especially if you have a minyan, if you have a congregation involved, there's a tradition to use a cup when we do the benching, when we do the grace after meals. So even on a regular Shabbos, you end up having 2 cups of wine almost by default. On Pesach, we're only adding 2 more, in the middle. So the 4 is corresponding to the 4 languages or the 4 expressions of redemption that's mentioned in the Torah. All right, there's a lot of common customs like the Seder plate, which have the 6 items, which we'll talk about. So next week we'll go over the actual step by step of the Seder. So we'll go over the 6 items of the Seder plate, as well as the 15 steps of the Seder itself. But a lot of these customs are beyond or in addition to the actual steps of the Seder. A famous one is gebrachts, dipping matzah or matzah meal into water. Are you familiar with that one?
I'd say that again.
It's called in Yiddish gebrachts, which means it means dipped matzah dipped into water.
Really?
It's one of the number 1 questions I get when I go to ShopRite, anytime before Pesach, and they have at the Pesach section people who are there, and they're looking at different Passover items. And one of the things that you'll see on the boxes, it says non-gebrachts. What is this non-gebrachts thing? Have you seen it? Have you seen that on boxes on certain products?
Sure.
Okay. So gebrachts is a term for matzah soaked in water. All right. When does somebody soak matzah in water?
Matzah bride.
Matzah bride, and there's one other famous one, matzah balls, right? Okay. So believe it or not, and Chabad is one of these, believe it or not, followers of this custom. We do not eat matzah balls on Pesach. We do not eat soaked matzah on Pesach. Now somebody might say, oh my gosh, not having matzah balls in your soup is like not having vodka in your orange juice. Like, it's like against the law, right? Okay. But it is an extra stringency, and I'm not advocating that this has to be done. I'm just, I'll address what the source of that is. And it's actually one of the most logical and basic, most logical and understandable customs in terms of extra stringencies for Pesach.
Rabbi, what about the soup mandlin?
So soup mandlin depends what they're made out of. The one, if they're made out of matzah meal, it's the same problem. Because you're taking, again, problem only for those who want to stay away from it. I'm not advocating that you should. But for those who stay away from gebrachts, from soaked matzah in water, will not use knedlach, matzah balls, will not use the mandalach, the soup mandals that are made out of matzah meal, nor any cake mixes that are made out of matzah meal. Because it's basically ground flour, which you're ending up mixing with other things, ground matzah flour. That's why most of our desserts, Anita, on Pesach are gluten-free, right? And
I'm sure he would have appreciated that.
Because everything besides matzah in the Chabad custom is to be non-gluten. Because once you have gluten, even if it's matzah, there is the problem with gebrachts. And I'll explain what the problem with gebrachts is, or why it's a stringency. you bake matzah, the flour and the water bake in under 18 minutes, and it comes out as the flat, the cracker that it is. But is there a possibility that there's going to be some grains of flour that didn't get fully baked? It's a very high probability. And now you take your shmura matzah, even, right? So it's the highest safety, if you will, when it comes to matzah. But now you're taking that matzah, and now if you're dipping it into your soup, or you're dipping it into your coffee, Dunkin' matzah on Pesach, you're dunking it into your coffee. Now there is that slight possibility, again, slight, but a possibility nonetheless, that grain of flour that did not get fully cooked, fully baked in the oven is now going to be fermenting or rising by dipping it into your liquid, whatever that might be. And you might end up with chametz. Now again, that's a far out possibility. And it's not common, and it's not necessarily something that you have to follow, but I'm explaining the purpose or the reason, behind it.
So you don't put cream cheese on your matzah, because if you put cream cheese, that can happen too.
Yeah.
There is liquid in the cheese, and you soak your matzah with the cream cheese.
It's very important that you bring that up. So cream cheese, yes, because it might have a bit of water that's mixed into it. But the whole idea of this, the whole concern of an unleavened piece of flour to become leavened, right, through liquid, is only water. It does not apply to fruit juices or fruit, so for example, avocado. My kids love putting avocado or guacamole on their matzah. Okay, so we do put avocado on the matzah, but we make sure that when we make our guacamole that it's made with ingredients that no water has come in contact with it. So if it's lemon juice that we add, it's freshly squeezed lemon juice. Because if you go buy bottled kosher for Passover lemon juice, it's usually reconstituted. So there's a lot of water in it, So you could put matzah, you could put cheese on your matzah, you could put fruit on matzah. Steve, you asked before about jelly or jams. Is that what you said before?
Yeah, I was only kidding, Rabbi.
Oh, okay. But in theory, if you have a jelly or a jam that has been made without any water, it's totally okay. Again, it's totally okay to take your matzah and dip it into water. There's nothing halachically wrong with it. But for those who observe this tradition, that's what they rely on, that concern that something could be coming in contact. The same thing would be with wine, by the way. If you take your matzah and you dip it into wine, if you have a wine that has no water added to it, it's perfectly okay to dip matzah into wine. And Ira, you talked about matzah brai. If you have milk that doesn't have any water mixed into it, and eggs, that's not water. So you could have matzah brai, even without the concern of...
I feel so much better now, Rabbi.
And Jim of blessed memory, he used to make a delicious matzah brittle.
Yeah.
So he used to take matzah and he used
I don't
to...
know what the recipe is.
Joanne, have you had Jim's matzah brittle?
Oh, yeah.
No, I never did.
No, you
He
never
never
did?
made that for me.
Really?
Yeah. I
So
don't
he
think
would-
I visited them on Passover.
Oh, no? Okay. So he would take matzah and he would melt, butter and brown sugar and chocolate and... What was it?
I lost the sound.
Oh, okay. So you would melt butter and brown sugar and chocolate all in like a nice, good thick syrup. He would smear it all over the matzah,
Oh my goodness.
and then he would put it in the fridge or freezer to let it harden, and it was, oh my gosh.
I made something. I tried that one year. That sounds like, I didn't know Jim did it also, but I've tried that.
Yeah, Jim did that. So there's nothing wrong with putting anything on your matzah. But you could even make matzah brittle as long as it does, for those who want to keep gebrachs, if it's made without water. But at least it's coming into the context of understanding two things. Number one, why a lot of the products might say this word gebracht or non-gebracht. So now you know what that means. And also, it also explains why the majority of the Passover cakes and cookies that are made on the market today are made of potato starch, and they are they're not made out of matzah meal, because their biggest clientele are people who do not use meat, matzah meal on Pesach.
Rabbi, I think
Yes.
last year I purchased a bunch of almond flour for
Yes.
Pesach.
That's a
We
great
did too.
option. That's a very good option for Pesach. Yeah.
So I had two questions. I had actually a question.
Yes.
You said that the cups and the Seder plate is tradition. So what is exactly the bare minimum do you need to have a Seder? You have to read the Haggadah.
You don't even have to. When it comes to the bare minimum is 1 cup of wine, 1 matzah, and to
Bitter
tell a little bit about a little bit of the bitter herb, and the bitter herb doesn't have to be straight up horseradish, by the way. It could be a combination of horseradish as well as romaine lettuce. Romaine has is a cousin to horseradish. It is.
Wow.
It's in the same. It's related.
endive.
Family. It has endive as well. They have a sharp element to them, and therefore they count towards the bitter herbs. So in my Seder, I don't eat the entire amount of bitter herbs straight up with horseradish, unless my sinuses are terrible, then I might. But otherwise, using a combination of romaine lettuce or endive together with horseradish. So if you really want to do, just the basics, is a cup of wine, a piece of matzah, a small piece of horseradish, and to tell the story of Pesach. Everything else that you add is great, and I encourage them, to do a little bit of a Seder, but those are the main things that will satisfy the quote unquote requirements of observing Pesach.
Yeah, because for a lot of people are going to be alone this Passover, as myself. I don't see myself preparing a Seder plate and all that.
I think a lot of us are saying that.
Just for myself. So
So
I'm talking not even a couple. I'm alone here,
yeah,
and who needs to pull out all the dishes for Passover and everything else. I really don't feel like it, but I do want to mark it. And so the bare minimum, I'm glad to hear that this is tradition, really.
it is. But I at the same time, I'm not going to tell you that doing a Seder with the 15 steps or having a Seder plate is unimportant. These things have become custom because of their importance. And the Seder plate is almost like a visual that you have in front of you that really helps bring home the point of what Passover is. So, just like, for example, when you give a class, or if you're, telling a story to a child, to your grandchild, right? You can do so just by words. You could do so with visuals, audio. I happen to be a visual person myself. So anything that I can use with, examples or samples or illustrations, it helps me internalize and relate to it a lot more than if it was just words, right? So the Pesach Seder was really designed for just that. Having a Seder plate in front of us with each of those items that, which we'll go over next week, what they are in detail, the shank bone and each of those things have depth and meaning to not just Passover from Egypt, thousands of years ago, but personal freedom, personal messages of how to relate to the messages of freedom. So in your case, if somebody is going to be doing a Seder alone, knowing what the basics are, and to not skip over those. There's certain things you should not pass over. Is important. But I also recognize that making entire Seder plate could be cumbersome or almost, it sounds difficult to do for yourself.
And it's also sad because, I'm not used to be alone for Pesach. I've never been alone for Pesach.
But Bridget, we're here to help you. I'm going to be helping. We'll be preparing some, like Seder plate samples or ideas that you can pick up from us or something like that we could prepare for you. That you don't have to necessarily go make all the items. So we'll be having a lot of resources available, in addition to the Shmura Matzah that we're going to give you, or anybody who would like to have, we're going to make that available. So we'll have some, some of the Seder items for your plate. We can help you out with that as well. All right.
Yeah.
This way, at least you can have it without having to worry about making.
It's not a bother. It's nothing to make a Seder plate. It's just,
Right. It is,
like, why bother? You by yourself,
Right.
I view Pesach as a family thing. So,
Right. Also, a lot of it has to do with the personality thing. If you were quarantined on your birthday, would you make yourself a little cupcake?
no.
Okay, I would.
I would.
I wouldn't. Not only would I make myself a cupcake, I'll make myself a birthday cake. Okay. So my point is that when you're by yourself, there might be certain things that you're going to incline to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that because I would not make myself a birthday cake. But what would be the reason that even if you're by yourself, to make yourself a little cupcake and put a little candle on it to celebrate your birthday, is because you'll know later on that you took that night seriously, that evening, you celebrated your birthday, you made yourself important to yourself. I'm not saying you have to. I'm just explaining why. I'm just explaining what the difference would be. Is there a benefit in having the Seder plate in front of you? Absolutely. If it's too difficult, it will not take away from your observance of Pesach at all.
It's not difficult. It's just.
I know. It can only add. And you know what? When you do a Seder by yourself, instead of it being a 3 or 4 hour ordeal, it could be 45 minutes.
I can ask all the questions. I don't have to be the youngest one.
Right. Exactly. Again, there's a lot of things at the Seder that are very meaningful, and Passover has so many layers and so many aspects of things that have, layers and layers of meaning on a psychological level, on a spiritual level, on a physical level, and they're all important. But knowing the basics and knowing what is, the absolute necessity is definitely important to know what you're going to do.
But doing the Passover, it's to relay the story to the children, so nobody forgets. You're by yourself. Why do we even read it?
Well,
I read it for the last 63 years.
in my case, I'm so childish. I need to tell me.
Well, you're not wrong, Sigi. I mean, we each have a child, within us. We have, and not only that, we're all Hashem's children. If we're not having our children ask them 4 questions to us, we're saying it to our Father in heaven. So Manashtana should be recited, even if somebody is saying, the Seder by themselves.
Oh, okay.
So it's part of the traditions. You could fulfill the ones that you feel comfortable or able to, but it is important to know which ones you could let go and which ones you shouldn't. And if you're quarantined and by yourself and say, you know what, I did the 4 questions, but I didn't do the matzah. That's what I was trying to prevent. Do the matzah and don't do the 4 questions if you had to choose.
Okay.
Okay. And also there's a lot of resources online, including our website, where you could download a Haggadah. So if you don't have one at home because you never made a Seder at home and you want to get one, you could always borrow one from Chabad. But even if you're uncomfortable doing that or you don't want to get out, you can do it on your computer. There's so many resources that we have online, including a downloadable Haggadah right on our website that you can always download.
Rabbi, isn't the Seder really just a service? So couldn't you then extrapolate the question, if you were home alone, would you say a particular prayer? I mean, there's certain, like Hallel, there's certain things in there that are actually prayers as opposed to discussion.
Well, I would actually argue and say that a Seder is not a service, it's a dinner.
Okay.
And the dinner has 15 steps to that dinner. And one of the steps to the dinner is to say Hallel. And that Hallel, those verses of praise are not limited to whether or not you're doing it with a minyan or you're doing it alone. While it's going to be very surreal doing this alone, there's a lot of reason why we should say Hallel. Of course, we want to be able to be at a Seder with all the children, the grandchildren, or with community, or with friends. And to be able to sit there alone, to be able to do that can be difficult. But let's look at it from a different perspective. The fact that we are alive, the fact that we're here, we're able to celebrate, and the fact that we, didn't get something, God forbid, a life-threatening disease that prevented us from being able to have a Seder, that itself is good reason to say Hallel. We always could find reasons to be thankful. And, the fact that we have a roof over our heads and we're able to, be free people and choose to be quarantined instead of being forced to be quarantined. These are a lot of reasons to be thankful for. So Hallel has its place, even when we're observing a Seder alone. So there's certain elements that we lose out, maybe Kaddish, but it could be replaced by prayers. But the Seder was always meant to be a family setting. It was never meant to be only done like a service in a community. It's always meant to be a family setting. Any other questions that I could answer? Everybody's good? Okay. I want to take a minute and show you some things on our website. I'm going to share the screen with you. One second. I'm still learning this system.
Doing great, Rabbi.
Thank you. Are you able to see this Haggadah that I have on the screen?
Yep,
Yeah.
it's up now. Yep.
Okay. So this is a Haggadah we made last year with Hebrew School. You're able to, it's on our website. I'm going to show you where it is in a second. You're able to download it if you want to use it. It also has got a lot of visuals. So I just wanted to show this to you.
Nice.
How it has, the Seder plate, each of the items and how they're supposed to be set up. Okay, and then we have our own Hebrew School kids who are illustrating all the different steps of the Seder.
Oh, cool.
That's
Okay.
very cute.
So that is something that you can just get easily on our website. And, because the mitzvah is to tell the story, as we said before, you can do it in any language. You don't have to start sitting reading through the Hebrew as if you're, you're reciting for your bar and bat mitzvah lessons. You go through the English. There's no reason why you can't do that. And then, the 10 plagues. So each of these things, to help illustrate what the Haggadah is about.
Very
Okay,
cool.
so that's one thing I wanted to show you. And the next thing is, do you see the Passover with Chabad, or is that?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So on our website, if you go to the Passover section, or if you go to ChabadOrange.com/myPesach, you're going to get all of these options here. Okay, so here we have the.
Isn't Chana jealous? My Pesach?
Okay, so here is the do-it-yourself Seder that we're doing right now. Okay, so it's got the links here for where we're going to do the classes that you guys have probably logged in from. A lot of the questions that we have addressed. Okay, here everybody can see this. All these different
Yes.
things that I'm showing you.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Here is the form to sell your chametz online. Okay, so from the comfort of your own home, you're not going out and doing any transactions with anybody. You're just filling out your information here and any other locations that you might have chametz at, like your work, for example. And then you are appointing us to be your power of attorney, so to speak, in selling your chametz. You're not giving us your social security number. You're not giving us any power of attorney for anything other than your actual chametz. So nothing is, you have nothing to worry about in terms of ownership. I've had people who have expressed their hesitancy of, doing something like this because, what are you signing over to the rabbi? Rabbis are very scary when it comes to signing things over. So, but rest assured, this is limited to, you're simply delegating the rabbi to sell the chametz on your behalf to a non-Jew, so you don't end up owning any chametz on Passover. Okay, it literally takes 30 seconds and not more. Okay, there are lots of online stores that you can, buy things. Buy things. I also want to mention that it's important to realize that, when it comes to making Pesach at home, and you're concerned about, if you don't have all the Passover dishes or things like that, you can get some paper goods that are really nice, that are very inexpensive, and you don't have to worry so much about dishes. If you've been to a Seder at Chabad.
Now you tell me, Rabbi, now that I bought all those dishes and glasses and everything else.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not knocking them, but I'm saying.
No, I'm only kidding. I've done both over
Right,
the years.
okay. But there's a lot of provisions that you can get online that can be sent to you, if there's anything that you need. And we're also here to help you with anything that you might need. So if you have trouble finding something, we're happy to help. Okay, so there's a link to a Passover store, but you could use any place that you like. Here's the calendar that gives you all the times. So timing is important for one very good reason, is because when we do the Seder, we want to make sure that we're doing it on Pesach. And that, if you're going to do it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon before Pesach starts, you're not actually doing the Seder. So all that eating matzah, we're not doing it if we're doing it at the wrong time. So having a Seder, so the calendar with the times is very important to know, when the candle lighting is and when the day starts and when the second Seder starts and so on.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Here's a cute link to a Hebrew School Passover video that we did a couple of years ago that you could watch if you'd like. Okay. Now here's something that could spice up your Seder. We use it at our Chabad Seder. We have silly Seder songs. Okay. So like, a song to the tune of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" or the Macarena. All right. So there's really cute, or from just a spoonful of sugar. So there's, if you wanna spice things up, to make your Seder a little bit light or a little bit funny, or especially if you're doing both Seders and you want to make one Seder, you want to change it up a little bit from one night to the next. So we've used them at our Passover Seder, and it's been a lot of fun.
Very cool.
Okay. Our community Seders are, we wrote that it's only going to be available if Corona passes us over. Donate online is an option you'll find on every page of Chabad.
Sure.
By Shmura Matzah is, the inside inscription here, the Rolls Royce of Matzah, I actually do not like that term, because Rolls Royce actually kind of lends itself to something like a luxury. And that's not what Shmura Matzah is. It's more of a safety feature. So rather than a Rolls Royce, I would say, like, what's the safest car out there? What's a car that has the most, what did you say?
The Subaru.
Okay, so it's the Subaru. It's the Subaru of matzah because it has, extra safety precautions on them. So there are ways you can get Shmura Matzah online, but I also mentioned for our community, we're happy to provide as a gift to you any, the matzah that you need for the first Seder.
Cool.
Here's a link for asking any questions that you like. It's basically my email address. You could send us. And then Passover videos is a selection of my favorite Passover videos. Now, there's a lot of Passover videos out there, even on our website, but I put together a few years ago a list of some of the videos that I think are really, I personally like them in regards to Pesach. Maybe some of them will go through next week. Here is that Hebrew School Illustrated Haggadah that I just showed you that you could download. All right, so that's right there. Okay.
It's the cutest thing.
And here's a cool thing. This is a Manishtana trainer. Okay. If you want to be able to impress yourself, Bridget, when you when you say the Manishtana, okay, but you forgot the tune or you forgot the pronunciation, so we have a tool. It's an interactive tool called the Manishtana Trainer. You can pick the Manishtana text, the standard, or the Chabad, or the Yiddish. The standard text is the order of the 4 questions is different in the standard Haggadah versus the Chabad Haggadah.
Oh, really? What's the difference?
That's a good question.
Manishtana.
Manishtana. So in the standard Haggadah, the first question is about why we eat matzah and not chametz.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's the first question. If you go to Chabad, the first question is about the dipping. Why do we dip twice on Pesach? So that's a separate class as to the insight as to the difference, why there's that difference. But let's say you're picking the standard one, and then the pronunciation is the Ashkenazic one or the Israeli one. Basically, whether you say Shabbos or Shabbat.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pick the Ashkenazic one. So you can just click on it. Do you hear the sound?
No.
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 So, a second. So I have to share.
When Jamie went to yeshiva years ago, she learned the Manishtana, and she taught it to me when she was little. And that's how I know it.
Tell me if you hear this. You hear that now?
No.
You're
I-
not
I
really-
think you have to hit the speaker to the right of the arrow where you are. Just hit the speaker symbol.
That mutes me. Yossi, do you know how to share the sound of the computer?
On the bottom, it says share.
More. Okay, chat, pause recorder. No. Oh, here. Share computer sound. Okay.
There you go.
Now you can pause it, right? And let's say there's a particular word that you're not sure how to pronounce it. You can keep on doing this very annoyingly.
Nishtana, hallelo.
Now the point is that you can hover onto any word and it helps you pronounce it and you could practice it. So this is particularly cool for somebody who wants to brush up on their becoming an expert.
We have it for everything, so we can practice.
Yeah, we have it for Kaddish. We have it for a lot of things.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Very cool. I love that.
Thank you. I love it too. That's why I highlighted
I like that
it here.
too. We're probably going to use it too.
All right, awesome. Okay, so in addition to that, let me go back. All right, so these are all the links that I created for our, the things that I like or that we have on our website. But in addition to that, we have here your complete Passover guide. And this takes you to the Chabad website in general that has just thousands and thousands of videos, recipes, articles, and so much, so many resources that are here that you can use for Pesach. So here's a whole section under coronavirus Passover resources.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so how to clean for Passover in less than 10 days. Coronavirus next year Seder plans. A lot of what we discussed here is discussed in this article here. How to prepare your kitchen, some things like that. In addition to that, if you go to the regular section, there's Passover stories, there's multimedia, so many different Passover videos. You can check out, so many cool things about, okay, here's the link to that Manashtana trainer that I just talked about. But there's so many different Passover videos for all different ages that could really be helpful. You can see how shmura matzah is made. You could, check this out. There's just so many different things out there. Why do matzah have holes? There's just a lot of resources out there. Matzah documentary, how matzah is made and things like that.
Cool.
There's just hours and hours of stuff that's there. And then you got the recipe section. So there's a lot of, the traditional things, appetizers, salads. There's just a whole host of things there. Some of them have videos attached with them. You even have, the Seder plate, how to prepare all the things, the things that you need for the Seder plate. So there's a tremendous amount of resources that are right here on this website. But just always remember that if you have a question or if you have any trouble getting any resource, that's what we are here for. We are here to help you navigate the system, to get whatever you need. And you should rely on us because that's what we're here for.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Yasher
Rabbi.
How do I stop sharing my, there we go. Stop share. Now I can see everybody. Okay. All right. Okay, so the plan is next week that Chana and I together will go through the Seder plate and the 15 steps of the Seder. So we want to do it as simple and as straightforward as possible. And then on top of that, if we have time for insights or additional layers of, of explanations, fine. But we want to be able to just do, within 45 minutes, just to go through the basic steps of the Seder that, you can do them at home without any questions about how to do or why or so on and so forth.
Excellent.
Okay?
Yasher. Looking forward to it.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah,
very
good
much.
call.
Nice, very good.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Rabbi.
Until then,
Thank you, Rabbi.
let us know any questions you have.
Thank you
Hey,
very much.
everybody.
All right.
Rabbi,
Everybody
you
should
take
be,
care.
everybody should be well and be safe.
All right. And
You too, Ira.
may Corona pass us over.
There you go.
Amen.
Yes.
Hey,
Oh,
everybody.
yes.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Good night, everyone.
Good
Good night.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Oh, how nice.
It'll definitely be a different kind of Passover this year.
Yeah.
Because I always put everything that I needed to do Passover this year.